My name is Lynn J. Gillies, nicknamed Dobie Gillies. I was the first mayor of Fairfield. We incorporated Fairfield back in 2004. The reason we incorporated is because at that time we were under the control of the county. County being all the way over on the other side at Provo, and us in Fairfield, we didn't feel like we had much of a say of what was going on in our community. Our first landfill out here was put out here before we incorporated, and it was put in by the county. And we fought to not have it, but they just ignored us. So consequently, we ended up with an airport that we didn't want. We ended up with that, and it was all under the county. So to protect ourselves and to protect our water, the only source we had to be able to do was to incorporate and become a town where we would govern ourselves. We had to go through the steps of determining if the people wanted to do so. So we went around, and it's a small town, so we went around and we talked to everybody about it. Everybody seemed to be very much in favor. And when I went around and gathered the signatures of all the people that owned the property, we ended up taking in the town of Fairfield, 28 square miles. We went through a study to see if we were capable of becoming a town. And the county commissioners come around and decided that we would probably be able to do it. They had their doubts, but I figured we could do it, and I had some ideas of doing it. So
I'm Larry Ellerton. I had the opportunity as a county commissioner to work with Lynn as a mayor of Fairfield over the years that he served there as mayor, and it was a great opportunity for me to do so.
The town had all got together and did an election of who they wanted as their mayor, and they elected me to be the first mayor of Fairfield at a offhand vote in the old schoolhouse of all the residents of Fairfield.
I viewed him and came to know him as an individual who was genuinely interested in what he was doing. He was dedicated to the things he was doing, and he was going to make sure that it happened right and that he saw things through to the end.
I think my favorite part as being mayor is I joined, I wanted our voice heard.
He knew what he wanted, and he was steadfast in trying to get that. He would see a need, and he would look for a solution. He didn't come with his hand out. He came with a solution that said, let's work together and see if we can get this done.
After my first term, when they appointed me, we went for 4 years, and on the next election, 4 years down the road, I was asked if I would be the mayor again. And I said, well, if nobody else wants it, I would do it. So I didn't campaign, didn't run, didn't do anything. But after the election, a lady up in Cedar Fort, Cheryl Anderson, she called me the next morning and told me, did you know that you were the only mayor in the entire nation that took all of the votes from the people in the town eligible to vote in the whole nation? It wasn't a lot. We had 135 people, but I felt good. I maintained the mayor for about 6 years altogether, and then I figured it was time for somebody else to get to. I was not paid. I did a lot of the things for the town, the different meetings. The budget for the town was real small. We had to prove that we would be able to make it, and consequently right now we have really made it. We started out with a budget real small, and now the budget that we're getting in for that little town is knocking on the door of $1 million. So my service in the military in Vietnam aided me tremendously when I became mayor of Fairfield. It helped me in the line of being able to do research and go back and find out what I had to do and when I had to do it and what had to be done.
That's one thing about Lynn, is that he showed up. He wasn't a mayor or a participant in these things in absence. And he took it seriously, and as he apparently has in his military service as well, takes things very serious, and yet he is a good friend to all, and I consider him a friend.
People ask me a lot of times how I got the name of nickname of Dobie, and back in the 50s there was a sitcom, and it was Dwayne Hickman, and it was the Many Loves of Dobie Gillies.
My name's Dobie Gillies. This is where I come to think when things bug me, which is like every day.
Dobie?
Yes, Dad?
What are you doing?
Oh, just taking a little money.
Dobe? Dobe?
Maynard?
Is that you, Dobie?
Yeah, Maynard.
As soon as I got in the Army in 57, and the first drill sergeant that I ran into found out my name was Gillis, I got tagged with Dobie Gillis, and it's been there ever since. I finished the 11th grade at Pleasant Grove High School, and I had an urge of wanting to do something more, and I wasn't being satisfied myself that I felt in school there. So I joined the Army with the consent of my mother and dad. I was 16 years old when I entered the service, but I went to basic training in Colorado, down at Fort Carson, Colorado, and I went from there to AIT, which was at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and then I also finished jump school at that point. After that, I was sent to Fort Campbell, Kentucky, where I was put into the military police there. After that, I was there for a while. I came down on orders and I was sent to Korea, and I was in Korea when I was just barely maybe about halfway through my 17 years. That was being sent to Korea and not knowing anything over there, and I didn't know what they were saying. I was at the 5th Cab, which was the Black Knights, and they were stationed at Queen Block and at CC2. I also ran the projectors in the theater, and was pretty much in the recreation department, and went down to Seoul and picked up the floor shows for the GIs there at the community club. I don't know how them Papasons got those pigs tied on the back of them bicycles and pushed them around. I don't know. I never seen a pig hold still that well. They did a lot of different stuff that it was just not real for me. I was born and raised on a farm, and we didn't ride no pigs on a bicycle. After I left Korea, though, I came back to Fort Lewis, Washington on that first tour in Korea. And I got assigned to the 296 Military Police Unit there. And I worked there, and I got certified as a scuba diver, and so I got the Harbor Patrol, they called it, on the Puget Sound, which ran right through Fort Lewis, Washington. So it was because we had some of our recreation areas were there when we had people out water skiing on the Puget Sound, and we'd get people that drowned and stuff, and that was what our task was scuba divers, is to go get them and haul them out and recover the bodies, which wasn't, I think we only had 2 the whole time I was there. I hurt my back in Panama, and I was signed to Fitzsimmons, and then after I left Fitzsimmons, I was sent to Germany. And I was over there, I was with the 15th Infantry, and I happened to be so lucky as to be assigned to Charlie Company, 3rd Platoon, which was the same platoon that Audie Murphy was in during the Second World War when he won his Congressional Medal of Honor and all that stuff. So they had us dress up every Saturday and march to the post theater, and we had to watch to hell and back. I've seen that movie so many times. After my tour over there, I was sent back to Fort Carson, and I took over the training NCO position there because of I guess I was channelized after the courts and boards and my skill of being a typist that I ended up on a lot of clerk jobs and a lot of different things. But I enjoyed that, and I got inspected quite frequently on all of my paperwork I had. I also I qualified and was on the Fort Carson rifle team. We were shooting M1 rifles then. Loved that rifle. Loved that old M1. When I left there, they decided that I was so good at Korea, they wanted to send me back. So they sent me back to Korea again. I was with the 7th Division in Korea on my second tour, and I made my E5, and I became got back into running the theater and the projectors there. I was selected and became the NCO of the month for the 7th Division in Korea. I was also on the honor guard there, and I was the NCOIC of the 4 Deuce Mortar Platoon. When I was in the 7th Division in Korea, we had an operation that we had to go up into Icicle Range and operate. That's in the demilitarized zone right next to it, and that's where we did our live fire exercises and so on. It just gets colder and colder. It don't ever get warm over there. Anyway, I was in the foxhole and I was in a sleeping bag and trying to keep warm, and I was wet. And here comes the helicopter, Huey helicopter in, and blows snow all over me. And the general gets out and walks over into the CP to talk to the commanding officer. And here's the pilot. He steps out of that helicopter, and I just knew that this was wrong. He had on the fur-lined winter parka, flight parka, shine boots, flight gloves, and he walked over to me and he said, "Hey, Sarge, do you know where I can get a cup of coffee?" I said, "Sir, if I did, I'd have drank the damn thing myself." And I knew right then, this guy knew what was going on. So when we got back, I went down and took my written examinations and applied for flight school. I was a drill sergeant at Fort Lewis, or Fort Dix, New Jersey, I'm sorry. And I had applied in Korea to go to flight school. And when I got up there, I went through a drill sergeant school, and I taught basic training at Fort Dix for, about 7-8 months. And I found my papers in the first sergeant's desk, and I got a hold of DA and asked him when I was, that I found him and what the deal was on it. And then the lady told me, Mrs. Shiraki, I'll remember her name forever, I think, that she says, "You've been approved. You got to be down to class 67-3 at Fort Wilders, Texas." And so I had to leave Fort Dix and go home, take my family home and drop them off. And then I went down to Fort Wilders, Texas for basic flight school. During the initial run on, they have a pre-flight, which is at was at that time was at Fort Wolders, and then your advance was at Fort Rucker. During the preliminary basic flight, you have they teach classes and everything like that. The TAC officers do, and I guess I was a little bit of a thorn in their side, because they would get up there to teach something, and I would raise my hand and tell them they're wrong. And they tell me, if you can do any better, get up here. So I did. And being an instructor and drill sergeant, and a drill sergeant, I taught all of them classes back to the basic trainees. So I ran it through the class, the programs the way it's supposed to be done. And consequently, when I finished that first 3 weeks of pre-flight, and we went over to our company where we was going to start taking our classes for actual flight, they made me the company commander at the first walk company for the first 2 weeks. Everybody else had become the company commander, only had to do it for 1 week. I had 2 weeks. And so I was the candidate company commander of that company for 2 weeks. During that period of time, that's when we started doing our flying. And we flew in, my flight was in TH-55s. And that's a 2-seater. And it's, we called it a Maytag washing machine with a extension cord. Because it was just so little, and boy, the wind just really knocked it around. It didn't have to be much of a wind to give you a ride. But we was doing that and doing our maintenance, and there was 2 other guys in the flight, that specific, with that same instructor as I was. And when I had 8 hours when I soloed, I was the first candidate in the class to solo. And it was real funny, because he put me there, and then he says, okay, you go out, you pick up the helicopter, go down on the pad, make your turns left, right, both sides, and then make your takeoff. So on the first takeoff, I go down there, and I was not the stablest hover in the world. It was like up and down and up and down. And when I got over there, and I did my turns, and then I took off, and I was shaking like a leaf. And I did my crosswind, and then I got on downwind. And I guess I didn't know that I was squeezing the cyclic, and that's where the mic button's at, and I squeezed it a little too tight, and I transmitted over the air, and I said, Lynn, what the hell are you doing up here by yourself? And so I did my 3 trips around the traffic pattern, and I was the first student to in the flight, or in the company, to solo. And when we come back in, they stopped at a motel and took me through, throwed me in the swimming pool. After my first 2 weeks as the company commander, Major Folda, who was the company commander of the first walk company, he says, I'm going to give you a superior rating. I saved the outstanding rating for people they build statues to. He says, do you mind waiting till Monday? This was on a Friday. Do you mind waiting till Monday before you give me my rating and stuff? And he says, if we can do that. I says, fine. So that weekend, I went out and found a rock, and it was in the shape of wings, and the color for first walk was red. So I had the post engineers bring it, and being an old NCO and stuff, you know how to manipulate and scrounge and barter and beg and get stuff. So they went out with a crane and a wrecker and brought it in, and they mounted it right in front of where Major Folda's parking space was at. So that weekend, while we were doing it, I went ahead and, with some other guys helping me, and we painted wings on it and painted the rock red. And then we had a plate engraved with 67-3 a class on it. And When he came in Monday morning, that rock was parked right in front of his parking spot. And he called me down. He says, "Is that you that did that?" I said, "Well, yes, me and some others." He said, "Okay, you got your outstanding rating." So I ended up getting a weekend off. So I had earned that. That's what you got if you got an outstanding rating. So got to spend some time with my wife and my kids. When I had finished up and I was in my latter part of it, I was appointed the battalion commander for the entire battalion of candidates going through there. There was approximately 1,800 of them at that time going through. The big build-up for Vietnam was going on. This was in '67. I was there for 7 months, and then I was sent back to Fort Rucker, where I went through CH-47 transition. That lasted for 4 weeks, the transitioning into the Chinook helicopter. And immediately upon the transition, I was sent to Vietnam. I was, when I got to Vietnam, I was assigned to Bravo Company of the 228th Chinook Unit out of, it was located at Quang Tri. We got a blanket call of a platoon of Marines under heavy fire in the Ashaw Valley. And there had been other aircraft made attempts to get in there and had not succeeded. Rather, they were shot down or they took heavy fire and was able to get out. But the IP that was there, and we talked and we said, okay, let's do it. So we took off. We had just topped off with our fuel. They said there was 33 Marines, and as a Chinook, we can handle 33.
My name is Terry Reed. I'm a former Marine. I was a gunnery sergeant for my last tour in Vietnam. I was in the Marine Corps for 15 years. My main job was motor transport maintenance. And that's what I was doing out in the middle of nowhere, which was fun, but not all the times. But this is the first time that we got hit, and it was scary. We had a message that came through and said that so what I used to call them, the Indians are coming back. And when I told my men the Indians are coming back, they first thought we had to go look for them. But this time we didn't, because we had too many vehicles down at the time, and we're trying to put them back together so they get back on the road. And we weren't actually supposed to be there where we were, but they had some trouble with their mechanics. They got sent out to do firefighting, and we got sent in to do the fixing. So while we got in to do the fixing, also came the enemy. Well, the young men were shot, but they were just wounded. But it was still hard taking care of them and trying to do the job. But we had to do what we did. It was getting pretty hot down there with the firefighting. And each of us had about 20 rounds. That's all they gave us, that we could find even. Because we'd been down there for about a week, as it was. And we knew that something was happening, because things were moving too fast. I'll be honest, I was just as scared as the next man. I was no Superman either.
Anyway, when we got flying over to the area, we could we could see the smoke and we got radio contact with the Marines on the ground, and they said that they were under pretty heavy fire, and they were up at there was an LZ, and they were up at the north end of the LZ, and so we made our approach down towards the south, and told them to be ready to get on the aircraft as rapidly as they can, and get in, get seated, get their seat belts on, and that, because we wanted to go immediately.
When the helicopter came in, that's when it got a little heavier. Stuff started falling from the sky. It was just like, when Lynn brought that thing in, he brought it in so straight, I couldn't believe it. You know, landed it, and yet he was taking fire, and we weren't getting anything. All we were doing was shooting back at the enemy, but he was taking all the fire for us. And when he came in, he was hot.
As we were going in, the IP was flying the aircraft, and the flight engineer was watching the instruments sitting between us. As we started our approach, we were about 100 foot off the ground, maybe less. We started receiving pretty heavy fire, and the first few rounds was hitting some of the instrument panel coming through the nose of the aircraft.
And the first thing I saw, the windshield go out. And he was really in trouble then, you know. I just, if he doesn't make it, we're not gonna make it. But to see that windshield get blown out, I don't know how he could fly it, but he flew it.
I noticed the chin bubble getting blown out, and then about between 50 and 25 feet off the ground, all at once there was just a pop and explosion, and my visor, I had it down, it got covered, and I reached up with my gloves and cleaned it off so I could see, and I glanced real quick over it. At Mike, and his face had been shot in the face, and his blood and that was blown all over my visor and stuff when I was cleaning. So I took the aircraft, and we were committed, so I just continued the approach on down with the aircraft and got it on the ground, and then we started really catching it. They were really peppering us a lot. Didn't have, the windshield was gone, the chin bubbles were gone. Some of the instruments had been destroyed coming through the backside of the console. I looked at the flight engineer, and he would have been shot. And so I was alone there in the cockpit. Excuse me. When I got it down, they started loading immediately.
Whatever he did, he just guided that chopper in for us, and we were able to get on and go. That's the only thing we were worried about, going somewhere. Even if it was wrong, we get out of there.
As soon as we got him on, I just hollered back at the crew chief, "Are they all on?" He says, "All that's here's there." And I started pulling thrust and taking off, and we was getting stitched down the sides and into the fuel tank. took a lot of rounds up through the bottom. I asked where the door gunner and the two door gunners were at, and he says they're both been hit. I said, has anybody hit on the aircraft? He says, no. I said, tell them to sit on their flight vests and their helmets because we're getting rounds up through the bottom.
It wasn't an easy ride back for any of us. We were kind of getting a little antsy, especially when you get into the helicopter, you throw your flight, all your flak jackets on top of the bottom of the plane and your helmets so you don't get hit. And the rounds were coming up from the bottom too, which is no fun.
So, I don't know, the adrenaline was running real hard in me, I know that, and all I was doing, and I was really praying. I was praying hard that we got out of there.
I don't know how he could fly it, but he flew it.
When we got up, I got headed on into LZ Sharon over by Quang Tree. That's where the Marine base was, on the other side of the river from us in Quang Tree. I really can't remember. I just know I was looking at the gauges and worried about the hydraulics and the controls and the RPMs on the engines and the rotor systems, and was headed on into the LZ there at Sharon. When I got there, I just I made my approach into the largest area there down at the far end and set it down and told them to unload. And I was sitting there in the helicopter and I couldn't move my legs. I thought I'd been shot in the legs. I guess it was just the adrenaline was so strong inside of me that it just locked me up. I was sitting there for, they said 30 minutes, but I don't think I was there that long. When I got out, I just went over to my hooch, and that was it. I just laid down on the bed. I'm sorry. When we got back and they left me alone for all the next day so I could unwind, I guess. But that was part of the job. I didn't learn to deal with it till later on. And that was my first tour in Vietnam. About the last, pretty close to the last year that I was mayor, I started having a hard time with dealing with my anger issues again and stuff. And it was getting, I think it was with the extra load of being mayor, and I'd been mayor then for a little over 5 years. Yeah, the hurt was so full inside of me in this, the dark, I don't know how to explain it other than that felt like my inners were just dead. There was a big hole inside of me. I felt like I didn't even know what love was. I didn't know what love felt like. I didn't know how to love anybody. I was just more or less a shell walking around trying to forget what I'd done and where I'd been.
While the military is at war, America is at the mall. You know, there's no real connection with combat. Less than 1% of the nation serves in the U.S. military. So when you have less than 1% serving in the military, the true understanding of war and combat and conflict is only held by so few people. So few people can really understand the absolute terror and horror and fear of war. War holistically, not just combat again. War holistically. The awfulness, the waste, the fear, the loneliness, the coldness, all of that. It's housed within so few people within our society that there becomes a divide between veterans and everyone else. And again, kind of going back to, you know, what did I feel when I came home? And it's that same divide. It's that same, no one really understands me unless they're a vet. No one really understands me unless they're this. And as vets, we can really paint ourselves into a corner. So my name is Sheldon Holgreen. I'm the director of the Veteran Success Center at Utah Valley University. I've been in the military for 15 years. I'm currently in the Army National Guard. I'm a chief warrant officer in the local Utah unit. I have a deployment with a combat engineer to Iraq 2003 to 2005 and to Afghanistan 2008 to 2009.
When I came back from Vietnam, I had a terrible time intermingling and being with my family because the PTSD that I realized really affected how I felt when I was with my family. I think because of that thought process that was there, that I was in the mode of, you don't know if you haven't done it. You don't know if you haven't been there. You don't understand. And that's how I know it. It made my family totally confused. It made me angry, and I was angry at a lot of things, and a lot of things I didn't know I was angry about. So that made the family unit very tense.
PTSD is an injury, so it's just harder to understand. There's probably going to be scars, long-term effects, and that injury is never going to be forgotten. So the symptoms of PTSD, from what I've seen, manifest in a myriad of different ways. So I have the experience on how I felt it, and then how I've seen others experience it. And for me, it was an extreme difficulty of reintegrating back into a society where I felt like I was apart from everyone else. For me, it was feeling like no one understood what I was going through. And in all honesty, some of the things I still struggle with is I am unable to make friends with people outside of the military. So, and this may sound terrible, but I don't see them as being able to be my friend if they haven't experienced what I've experienced.
And it's the anger that's in you that you cannot put away, the big empty hole that's inside of you that nobody understands. And I expected them to understand it, but they'd never been there and done it. And I was expecting the cure from my family, which they didn't understand why I was the way I was either. I didn't think I had a soul. Maybe that's a good term. My soul didn't jive with the way I felt inside.
It just puts you into this debilitating phase in your life where it's hard to function. And it's hard to be happy. Happiness for me has changed. Happiness is not what happiness used to be. And I feel like happiness will never again be the same. And maybe that's a part of, you know, life and growing up and all those things, but the ability to be happy and not just wear it as a facade or wear it as a mask, but to truly feel happy and to truly be okay with what you've gone through, I think is one of the biggest indicators for me. You know, was what we did right? Was it the right thing to do? Did we do a good job? Was it worth it? Was the loss of life worth it?
They tag post-traumatic stress as a mental problem. And you can't fly if you have a mental problem. Doesn't matter that you had the mental problem in combat, you could still fly, but you come back and they ground you. You can't fly. I couldn't understand why I could fly in Vietnam, but I couldn't fly here. So being at Fort Rucker, Alabama, that's the aviation of the Army. That's where all of the helicopters are at, and that's where the schools are at. And consequently, everybody almost came back from Vietnam and went to Fort Rucker. So consequently, we had an entire post down there that I could see that was pilots, and the alcohol rate of usage down there was horrendous. And I know it because I was doing a good part of it. But it's the only thing we could use to cover up the hurt and the pain and go on. It really didn't work, but it made you numb for a little while. But then it compounded more problems into it, because the problems that you was trying to wash away, they don't wash away, they're there. And then because you're drinking, you compound those problems with other problems.
I actually had a therapist tell me he worked with a lot of Vietnam veterans, and he said there was 3 things that he saw in people that helped them to overcome what they've been through. There was 3 points to it. The first was stronger relationships with both your family and friends. So deep relationships, strong relationships. If you have strong relationships with your family and friends, and you have meaningful relationships, that's step 1. Step 2, avoiding drugs and alcohol. Ensuring that drugs and alcohol are not your coping mechanism. And the last is a deeper religious belief. And it didn't have to be a Christian, it didn't have to be a God-based, it just had to be a deeper belief in a higher power. And he said over his years of working with veterans from Vietnam to the current conflicts, he said when people have been able to have those 3 pieces play out in their lives, he's seen them be successful. But if they aren't able to manage one of those, then destructive behavior follows.
Well, when it got real bad, it just seemed like there was no end to the hurt inside of me. And it was getting so intense, and things were falling apart in my family. And it just made them worse. And so it just compounded on the feeling of despair inside of me, that the wonder, why am I doing this? Why don't I just stop it? Why don't I just end it? I don't have to do it again. And so I was about to go out and commit suicide. But then, the reason I didn't is I got looking at my kids, thinking about them. I got thinking about my grandkids. It wouldn't have been fair. It wouldn't have been fair whatsoever. I'd have been the most selfish individual in the world. I know how I would have felt if one of them had felt the same way and taken their life. And I couldn't do that to them. What stopped me was the love of my family. So I went to the VA, and they put me in the psych ward for about 2 weeks, and gave me some therapy up there. And then the head of the PTSD clinic at the VA in Salt Lake set me up to go down to the inpatient at Palo Alto, California, which if I hadn't have got that, I don't know where I'd have been right now. But their episodes down there of what they did, they brought me around to questioning myself on my way of thinking, rather than thinking that I was had the survivor's guilt, that I had to change the idea and realize that I didn't, I had nothing to do with my crew and the people around me getting killed. It's hard to put it into words of how you really felt, but I had to go back, and what I did do that they helped me with is I went back through the episodes, the traumatic episodes that was causing me the problems, and I had to write them out. I had to put them all on paper. I had to even put down the smells, the taste, the what you seen, what you did, the whole 9 yards of everything. There was a lot of times that when I was doing that in the final stages, I went outside and I did throw up several times, because a lot of it came back to me as the other pilot's face being blown into on my visor and in my mouth. And it took a long time, and it's still hard for me to deal with raw meat because of the feeling that it comes up with. But I'm better than I was a long time ago. And if it hadn't have been for the people that put themselves out in Palo Alto and worked with us, didn't take any of our cry for sympathy, they did me some good. I'm sure they can do a lot of people a lot of good. Same problem.
It took me about over a year to get treatments. Of course, I'm one of these guys, nothing wrong with me. It didn't bother me, but it really did.
There's help. There is definite help. You've just got to seek it. Go for it. Don't live with it. Take it to the people who know how to help you. And I know they know how because they help me. I won't get over all of it, neither will they, but they can make it a lot easier to deal with. So if you've got post-traumatic stress, the thing you need to do is go to the VA, go to the centers. They can get you where you need to be and get you some help. And it's not being weak to ask for help. The times that I look back at, and times I had as a hard time, is I think probably I would do that again. I would go in, but I'd definitely want to have a different outcome. I'd want all of them and all of us get back. What bothers me about that is the families that my crew members that didn't get them back. It took me a long time before I realized and was taught that I did everything I could do. I got what could be saved out of the...
Getting pretty sentimental here. Lynn is a hero. He didn't set out to be one. I don't think he ever tried to be one, but that's what makes a hero, is somebody that is willing to do what needs to be done. And that's both in the military as well as in the history of Fairfield town. He took the bull by the horns, and even when people said it couldn't work, he said, we'll make it work. And he worked hard and got it done, and that's his nature. And he's to be given recognition and an honor for that willingness to work hard at things he does.
With Lynn Gillies, I want you to know how much I love you, and I want to let you know how much those 7 others do. They're home with their families now. And they wouldn't have been if it hadn't been for him. I wouldn't be able to enjoy my family if you hadn't. And I'll always love you. Took me a long time to find you. All I had to do was just look next door.
What are the ramifications of engaging in war? What's the cost, not only in dollars, but in ruined lives? And how can we, when we send young men and women to war, how can we not just be a bystander? And, while the soldier is at war, how is America not just at the mall? It's not easy. It requires some engagement on some level, some effort on some level, but I think it can be done.
I just hope that the guys that are out there, that I hope it sees this, understand. There's help, but you've got to seek it. You can't bury it with drugs and alcohol. You've got to stand up and face it. You stood up and faced the enemy. Stand up and face this other enemy.